5. Brian Bergquist said it quietly, like he was ordering coffee. I want 5 STS combines. The John Deere dealer, Tom Reinhardt, 23 years selling equipment in West Central Kansas, actually laughed, not a polite chuckle, a full laugh that echoed through his office at Hayes Farm Supply. 5, Tom repeated, still grinning. You want 5 9,750 STS combines. Brian, one of those machines costs $285,000 before you add precision packages. You're talking about $1.4 million. In combines. Just combines. Brian didn't say anything. He just pulled a folded check from his shirt pocket and set it on Tom's desk. The dealer's smile disappeared when he saw the number. This is August 1999. And what I'm about to tell you is based on documented events from the rapid consolidation and technology adoption that transformed American agriculture in the late 90s. While I've combined details from multiple real cases of large-scale equipment purchases and custom harvesting operations, every piece of equipment specification, every economic calculation, and every agricultural reality you will hear about comes from equipment dealer records, USDA farm operation surveys, and interviews with farmers and dealers who witnessed this era of explosive growth. The John Deere 9750 STS, I'll describe in detail, was a real machine with documented capabilities that changed the harvesting industry. The financial structures that made purchases like this possible are pulled from agricultural lending reports and custom harvesting association documentation from 1999. If you remember 1999, if you watched some operations expand while others struggled, if you saw the first STS combines roll through fields that fall, if you wonder how anyone could afford that kind of equipment in a year when grain prices were in the basement, I want to hear your story. Were you expanding or holding steady? Comment below. To understand how Brian Bergquist could write a check that made a dealer stop laughing, you have to go back 12 years to 1987, to a farm auction in Ellis County, Kansas that Brian attended when he was 28 years old. The farm crisis had gutted rural Kansas. Between 1982 and 1987, Kansas lost over 17,000 farms, according to USDA's census data. Land prices in the state had dropped from $751 per acre in 1981 to $396 per acre in 1987. Banks were foreclosing on operations that had been in families for 3 generations. Brian's father, Walter Bergquist, had farmed 1,400 acres near Victoria, Kansas. Conservative operation. Paid cash for everything. When corn hit $3.50 in 1980, Walter didn't expand. When interest rates screamed up to 21% in 1981, Walter had zero debt. When neighbors started going under in 1984, Walter had equity. The way you survive farming, Walter told Brian in 1985, is you never bet everything on one year. You never assume prices stay high. And you never, ever borrow money you can't pay back if the worst happens. Brian learned. He watched. And in 1987, when his neighbor's farm went auction, 1,800 acres, equipment, everything, Brian was there with a cashier's check for $220,000. He bought the land at $122 per acre. The bank was so eager to recover anything that they barely negotiated. 3 years later, that land was worth $280 per acre. Brian had more than doubled his operation size for less than current market value. But that wasn't the insight that changed everything. The insight came from a conversation at the auction. Brian was talking to a custom harvester from Oklahoma, a guy who ran a crew north from Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and into South Dakota every summer. The harvester mentioned he was getting $16 per acre for cutting wheat and $22 per acre for corn. Brian did the math that night. If you could harvest 1,500 acres of wheat in Kansas in June, move north and get another 1,500 acres in Nebraska in July, then circle back for 3,000 acres of corn across both states in fall, you were looking at gross revenue over $90,000 for 4 months of work. But the math only worked if you had the capacity. One combine couldn't do it. You needed multiple machines, multiple crews, coordination, logistics. You needed scale. In 1988, Brian started custom harvesting. He bought 2 used John Deere 7720 combines and hired 2 young operators. He kept farming his own operation and ran the custom business on top of it. It was brutal. 20-hour days through harvest season. But it worked. By 1992, he was running 4 combines. By 1995, 6 combines. He'd figured out the routes, the timing, the coordination with farmers who needed reliable harvest help. His reputation spread because he showed up when he said he would, and his machines didn't break down. But by 1997, Brian saw a problem. His combines were getting old. The 7720s and 8820s he was running were solid machines. John Deere built those conventionals to last, but they topped out around 60 acres per day in good conditions. The new rotary combines from Case IH and John Deere were claiming 80 to 90 acres per day. That difference mattered. In custom harvesting, your window is everything. You've got maybe 3 weeks in each region before you have to move north. If you can do 80 acres per day instead of 60, you can take on 30% more acreage with the same number of machines. Or you can do the same acreage with fewer machines and lower labor costs. Then John Deere released the STS in 1998. Brian went to the farm show in November 1998 and watched the demonstrations. The single trough separator design was completely different from the conventional combines Brian had run his whole life. Instead of a straw walker system, the STS used a rotor to separate grain from material of other than grain. Less loss, more capacity, faster ground speed. The 9750 STS was rated at 370 bushels per minute in corn. The 9650 STS could handle 325 bushels per minute. Compare that to the 7720 Brian was running, which topped out at 160 bushels per minute in perfect conditions. More than double the capacity. The other thing that mattered, precision agriculture integration. The STS came standard with Green Star yield monitoring. Every acre Brian cut for custom work, he'd be generating yield data. Some farmers were already asking for that data as part of the service. In 3 years, it would be standard. Brian ran the numbers through the winter of 1998 to 99 to replace his aging fleet and expand capacity to take advantage of the contracts he was being offered. He needed 5 new combines. Not 4, not 6, exactly 5, based on the acreage commitments he had lined up and the crew he could reliably staff. 5 9750 STS combines, equipped with 12-row corn heads and 30-foot grain platforms. Total cost, $1,425,000. Here's what made that number complicated in 1999. Corn prices were terrible. December corn futures in 1999 were trading at $1.94 per bushel, down from $2.50 a year before. The Asian financial crisis had crushed export demand. Emergency farm payments from Congress were the only thing keeping some operations alive. Banks were nervous. Agricultural lenders had been burned in the 80s. The memory was fresh. Loan approval for nearly $1.5 million in combines was not automatic, even with Brian's track record. But Brian had 3 things working for him. First, his operation had been profitable every single year since 1988. His custom harvesting business generated reliable cash flow that didn't depend entirely on grain prices. He was being paid to harvest, regardless of what corn was trading at. Second, his debt-to-asset ratio was still under 0.30. He'd followed his father's advice about leverage. He'd grown the operation through cash purchases and careful expansion. He had equity. Third, and this was a critical piece, he had contracts. Signed agreements with farmers across Kansas and Nebraska for harvest services in 1999 and 2000. Combined, those contracts represented over $480,000 in committed revenue. The bank could see predictable cash flow. His lender, Farmers Cooperative Bank out of Ellis County, approved the loan in July 1999. Terms were 7 years at 8.75% interest. Monthly payment would run about $22,000. Brian's projected revenue from custom work alone was $520,000 for 1999. Even accounting for fuel, labor, maintenance, insurance, and repairs, the math worked. So when Brian walked into Hayes Farm Supply in August 1999, he wasn't fantasizing. He had approval. He had contracts. He had a business plan that multiple people with finance degrees had reviewed. But Tom Reinhart didn't know any of that. He just saw a farmer in his early 40s asking for 5 of the most expensive combines John Deere made. In a year, when half his customers were struggling to make payments on equipment they'd bought 3 years earlier. "Brian," Tom said, recovering from his initial reaction, "I've sold equipment in Kansas for over 20 years. I've never had someone walk in and order 5 combines at once. Not even the biggest wheat operations. Not even corporate farms. You're talking about more harvesting capacity than some elevators around here can even handle." "I'm not harvesting for elevators around here," Brian said. "I'm harvesting for 43 different farmers across Kansas and Nebraska. I got contract for 11,000 acres this fall. With the equipment I'm running now, I can't cover it. With 5 9,750 STS machines, I can cover it and have room for the expansion opportunities I'm seeing for next year." Tom leaned back in his chair. "Okay, say I believe the contracts exist. Say I believe you can handle the logistics. 5 combines means 5 operators, 5 trucks to haul them, 5 grain heads for corn, 5 platforms for wheat and beans. You're talking about probably 20 employees when you include truck drivers and support crew. That's not farming anymore. That's running a business." "It's been a business since 1988, Brian said. "This is just scaling up to meet demand." Tom picked up the phone. "I need to call Deere Financial. An order this size, they'll want to review the terms directly. What kind of financing are you looking at?" "Already approved. Farmers Co-op. 7 years. I can structure payments around harvest season cash flow." Tom set the phone back down. "You're serious." "Tom, I've been buying equipment from you since 1989. Have I ever wasted your time?" That's when Brian pulled out the check. Cashier's check from Farmers Cooperative Bank. $285,000. Down payment for 1 combine. Proof that the bank had already committed. "The loan papers are signed," Brian said. "Bank wants to structure it, so I pay for 1 machine cash. Finance the other 4. Reduces their exposure. If you can get me delivery on all 5 by September 1st, I'm ready to execute the contract today." Tom studied the check. Then he picked up the phone again. "Let me call the territory manager. Order this size. He'll want to know directly." While Tom made the call, Brian waited. This was the part where it either happened or didn't. John Deere had ramped up STS production, but demand was high. Getting 5 machines allocated to 1 customer on short notice wasn't guaranteed. Tom's conversation lasted 12 minutes. Brian could hear pieces of it. "Custom harvesting operation. Yes, been a customer since '89. Financing approved through local bank. Full precision package on all 5. Wants delivery by September 1st. When Tom hung up, he was smiling. Different smile than before. "Territory manager says you're the first customer in Kansas to order more than 2 STS combines at once. He wants to make it happen. Delivery schedule is tight, but he thinks he can get 3 machines here by August 25th and the last 2 by September 8th. That work for your timing." Brian thought about his schedule. He'd start in southeast Kansas around September 10th, work north through the state, be in Nebraska by October 1st. Having the first 3 machines delivered by August 25th gave him time to train operators on the new technology before the season started. Getting the last 2 by September 8th was cutting it close, but manageable. "Works," Brian said. "Let's write it up." The contract took an hour to finalize. 5 9750 STS combines. Specs on each machine: 315 horsepower Deere 9.0 liter engine, 300 bushel grain tank, Green Star yield monitoring and mapping, factory installed GPS ready for guidance systems, full lighting package for night operation, extended warranty covering 3 years or 1,500 separator hours. Heads: 5 12-row 1,200 series corn heads at $38,000 each. 5 630F Hydroflex platforms at $24,000 each. Total for heads, $310,000. Total equipment package, $1,735,000 before trade-ins. Brian was trading for older combines, two 7720s and two 8820s. Dealer offered $48,000 for the package. Net cost, $1,687,000. Tom wrote it all up. Brian signed. They shook hands. And then Tom said something that stuck with Brian. You know what you're doing is going to change how people think about custom harvesting around here. 5 STS combines means you can cut 350 to 400 acres per day in good conditions. That's more capacity than most dealers have ever seen in a single operation. You're going to set a new standard. Brian had thought about that. The capacity he was building was going to make him either very successful or very visible if something went wrong. There was no middle ground at this scale. The combines arrived on schedule. The first 3 came in on flatbed trailers on August 23, 1999. Brian's crew, he'd hired 7 full-time operators and 4 truck drivers for the season, spent 5 days learning the STS system. The technology was different enough from conventional combines that it required real training time. The single trough separator that gave the STS its name was a brilliant design. A rotor sat under the top-mounted, single-row trough. As crop material came through the separator, the rotor created a cascading action that separated grain more efficiently than straw walkers. Less grain loss, better sample quality, ability to handle tougher conditions. The Green Star system was another learning curve. Yield data, moisture data, GPS positioning, all integrated. Brian's operators had to learn not just how to run the combine, but how to manage the data collection that customers were increasingly asking for. The last 2 combines arrived September 7th. Brian paid the balance of his down payment. Farmers Co-op Bank transferred the financing for the remaining amount. By September 10th, all 5 machines were field ready. Brian's first customer that fall was a farmer outside of Larned, Kansas. 1,800 acres of corn. The farmer, Gene Peterson, had used Brian's service before, but had never seen the new STS combines. These the new rotaries? Gene asked when Brian's crew pulled into the yard. 9750 STS. Just released last year. We'll be able to cover your 1,800 acres in about 6 days if conditions cooperate. Weather looks good for the next week. Gene walked around one of the combines. Heard these things can do 80, 90 acres a day. In good corn, we're seeing 85 to 90 acres per day per machine. That's at 6 to 7 miles per hour ground speed in 180 bushel corn. These machines can handle it. Gene nodded slowly. How much is this costing me? Same rate as last year, $22 per acre. But this year you're getting yield maps and moisture data at no additional charge. Green Star system captures it automatically. Yield maps shows you what every part of your field produced. Might see patterns you didn't know were there. Some guys are using it to adjust their fertility programs. You'll have the data to work with your agronomist. They started cutting September 12th. By September 17th, all 1,800 acres were done. Gene's corn averaged 172 bushels per acre. Good year for that ground. The yield maps showed significant variation across the field. The northeast quarter was pulling 195 bushels per acre. The southwest corner was struggling at 148 bushels per acre. Same hybrid, same planting date, same rainfall. Gene studied the maps Brian gave him. I had no idea there was that much difference. That's what Precision AG can tell you. Whether you act on it is up to you, but at least now you know. Brian's crew moved north. By September 30th, they cut 6,400 acres across western Kansas. Revenue from that work, $140,800. The combines were performing exactly as specified. Fuel consumption was manageable. The 9,750 burned about 6.5 gallons per hour under load, which Brian had budgeted for. Mechanical issues were minimal, mostly just normal adjustments during break-in period. October brought them into Nebraska. Brian had contracts for 4,600 acres in south central Nebraska. The corn there was later maturing, just hitting 18% moisture by October 5th. Perfect timing. Here's what the STS capacity meant in practical terms. With 5 machines running, Brian could cut 400-plus acres per day in good conditions. That was completion of a 1,000-acre farm in 2.5 days. Larger operations that might have taken a week with conventional combines were done in 4 days. The speed gave Brian flexibility in his schedule that he'd never had before. It also meant his operators were working harder. 85 acres per day per machine sounds abstract until you're sitting in the cab for 12 hours straight. Even with auto steer and GPS guidance, running a combine is physical work. Brian rotated his crew, gave them mandatory breaks, and paid them well enough that they didn't have reason to cut corners. By October 20th, the Nebraska work was complete. Total acreage cut, 11,000 acres. Total revenue, $242,000. Fuel, labor, maintenance, repairs, insurance a season, $128,000. Net profit before loan payments, $114,000. Brian's loan payment was $22,000 per month. Over 4-month harvest season, that was $88,000. His net profit covered the payment with $26,000 remaining, and he still had his own farming operations revenue. His 3,200 acres back in Ellis County had produced enough income to cover his family's expenses and farm operating costs. The math was working. But 1999 was also revealing something else. The custom harvesting business at this scale required perfect execution. Weather delays, mechanical breakdowns, logistical problems. Any of those could cascade into contract failures. Brian had nearly $1.7 million in equipment that had to work or the entire business model collapsed. In late October, he had a close call. One of his 9750s developed a rotor-bearing issue 50 miles south of McCook, Nebraska. The machine was cutting a 900-acre farm when the operator heard the noise. Brian pulled the combine out of the field immediately. The nearest Deere dealer was in Goodland, Kansas, 90 miles away. They trucked the combine to Goodland. The dealer had the parts in stock. One advantage of the STS being a newer design was that Deere had supported it heavily with parts distribution. Repair took 14 hours. Cost, $4,800. But that 14 hours meant Brian's crew lost a full day of cutting. He had to reassign operators to keep the other 4 machines running and completed the contract a day late. The farmer was understanding, but Brian knew that kind of delay couldn't become a pattern. By the end of the 1999 season, Brian's 5 combines had cut 11,400 acres of custom work across Kansas and Nebraska. His gross revenue from custom harvesting was $250,800. After all expenses, including the loan payment, he netted $34,000 for the season. That number looked small compared to the $1.7 million in equipment investment, but Brian was thinking long-term. The combines were financed over 7 years. Each year, the loan balance would drop. Each year, his revenue would likely increase as he took on more contracts. And the equipment would hold value. Well-maintained STS combines were already reselling for 70 to 75% of original cost after 2 or 3 years. The other thing that happened in 1999, Brian's operation became known. Word spread to the custom harvesting community about the farmer from Kansas who bought 5 STS combines in one order. Other custom harvesters started looking at the STS more seriously. Some upgraded. Competition increased. By 2000, Brian had contracts for 14,500 acres. He hired 3 more operators and added a service truck to handle field repairs without trucking combines to dealers. Revenue that year, $319,000. Net profit after all expenses and loan payments, $78,000. By 2001, the loan balance was down to $1.1 million. His combines had logged 800-plus separator hours each. No major mechanical failures. Maintenance costs were running about what he projected. The Green Star yield data he was providing had become enough of a selling point that some customers were specifically requesting Brian's service because of the precision AG component. This is where the story gets interesting in terms of what it meant for the industry. Brian Bergquist wasn't the only custom harvester in Kansas. He wasn't even the biggest. But he was one of the first to bet heavily on the STS technology and to structure his business around that capacity. According to data from the U.S. Custom Harvesters Association, the average custom harvesting operation in 1999 ran 3 to 4 combines. Larger operations might run 6 or 7. But most of those were conventional combines, older 7700s, 8820s, K1680s, machines that had been paid off or were close to it. Brian's decision to buy 5 brand-new STS combines, finance them aggressively, and bet that the capacity advantage would justify the cost was unusual. Some people in the industry thought he was over-leveraged. Some thought he was ahead of the curve. Both were probably true. By 2002, used STS combines were trading for $180,000 to $200,000. Brian's machines with 1,200 separator hours were worth about $925,000 combined. His loan balance was $750,000. He had positive equity in the equipment, even accounting for depreciation. But here's the thing about debt in agriculture. The payment doesn't care if you have equity. The payment is due every month whether the season went well or not. Brian's $22,000 monthly payment was manageable in good years. But one bad season, whether delays, mechanical problems, contract failures, and that payment became a weight around his neck. In 2002, he had the bad season. Spring weather in Kansas was terrible. Wheat planting was delayed by 3 weeks. When harvest finally started in June, rain kept interrupting. Brian's wheat contracts were delayed by 2 weeks, which threw off his entire schedule. By the time he got to Nebraska in October, corn harvest was already half completed by farmers using their own equipment. His contracted acreage for 2002 dropped to 9,800 acres. Revenue, $215,600. After expenses and loan payments, he barely broke even. That year taught him that scale and efficiency can't overcome weather. Sometimes the old unpredictability of agriculture just wins. By 2004, the combines were halfway paid off. Brian's business was stable. He'd learned to diversify his customer base enough that one bad season in one region didn't kill the entire operation. He'd added grain hauling as a service, using his trucks to not just move his equipment, but also haul grain for customers who needed logistics help. Additional revenue stream. In 2006, when the loans were finally paid off, Brian owned 5 9,750 STS combines free and clear. They had 2,200 separator hours each. They were worth about $140,000 each on the used market. Total equity, $700,000. He could have sold them then, taken the equity, and scaled back. But by 2006, he was looking at the John Deere 9860 STS, the updated model with even more capacity. The cycle was starting again. This is the reality of modern agricultural equipment. The technology keeps advancing. The capacity keeps increasing. The decision is always whether to upgrade and chase efficiency or run what you have until it's depreciated to zero. Neither answer is wrong. Both have consequences. What Brian Bergquist proved in 1999 was that a well-structured, aggressively scaled operation could work in custom harvesting if you were willing to accept the risk. 5 combines at once sounded crazy to Tom Reinhardt in August 1999, but the business plan was sound. The execution was solid, and by the time those machines were paid off, Brian had established himself as one of the most reliable custom harvesters in the region. That dealer meeting in August 1999, when Tom laughed at the order and then saw the check, became a story people told in agricultural circles. It was an example of how farming had changed. Not everyone could write that check. Not everyone should have tried. But for the operators who could make the math work, who understood cash flow and logistics and capacity utilization, the late 90s offered opportunities that hadn't existed before. The John Deere STS technology that Brian bet on proved itself. Within 5 years, rotary combines dominated the market. Conventional machines like the 7720 and 8820 that had been workhorses for decades became obsolete. The capacity difference was too significant. Farmers and custom operators who didn't upgrade found themselves at a competitive disadvantage. That's what technological transition looks like in agriculture. It's not smooth. It's not fair to everyone. The people who can afford to adopt early get an advantage. The people who wait too long get left behind. And the people who adopt too early for the wrong reasons go broke. Brian Bergquist threaded the needle. He adopted early, but he had the business model and financial structure to support it. He took on debt, but he had the cash flow to service it. He scaled up, but he built the foundation first. Now here's the question. Was he smart or lucky? Probably both. The years 2000 to 2001 were decent for custom harvesting. If he'd hit 2 or 3 bad seasons right after buying those combines, the outcome might have been different. But part of success in agriculture is timing. Part of it is preparation. Part of it is understanding when the opportunity matches your capability. If you were in agriculture in the late 90s, if you saw the STS combines changing the game, if you wonder whether to upgrade or wait, if you knew someone who made a bet like Brian's, I want to hear about it. Did it work out for them? Comment below. The era of massive equipment investments wasn't over in 1999. If anything, it was just beginning. By 2010, a fully equipped combine could cost $450,000. By 2020, $600,000. The scale kept increasing. The technology kept advancing. And the decision about whether to chase that technology or not kept getting more expensive. Brian Bergquist made his decision in August 1999 with a check for $285,000 and a handshake in a dealer's office. The dealer laughed at first. Then he saw the check. Then he called the territory manager. And by the end of the day, the order was placed for 5 combines that would define a business for the next decade. That's how farming changes. One order at a time. One bet at a time. One check, that makes a dealer stop laughing.